Hello, everybody. This is a track about environmental advocacy by the Icelandic Youth Environmentalist Association. This is day number 2. We also had a track, well, the first part of the track yesterday. So I will go very fast over what we talked about yesterday, and then we will continue. So we could introduce ourselves again, I think. Peter, you can start.
Thank you. And in case if any of you weren't here yesterday, I'm Pétur Halldórsson from and in Iceland. My background is in biology and with a little bit of studies in public administration. But I got entangled in environmental advocacy with the Icelandic Youth Environmentalist Association, where I was on the board from 2015 until 2020, and part of that time was as chair. I've also had in the last years experience with other advocacy organizations. I'm currently on the board of the Icelandic Environment Association, Iceland's largest environmental NGO. And I've also worked a little bit with Greenpeace Nordic, and currently I'm working as an consultant for the WWF Arctic program, and have been involved with also, you could say, a regional or youth organization called the Arctic Youth Network. Anyway, so that's kind of in short, but just really love talking about environmental advocacy, tools and tips and tactics. So I'm just really happy to be here.
Thank you. So my name is Þorgerður María Þorbjarnardóttir. Sometimes in an international environment, I'm open to be addressed as Maria or Þorgerður, you can choose. So I am currently the chair of the association. I began my environmental activism in 2014 when I joined the board of the association. And back then I was 19, and I mostly did smaller events about recycling and gift wrapping in newspapers and such. And since then I've been kind of growing into this role of like a more political role, doing advocacy for the environment. I grew up in Egilsstaðir, which is east of Iceland, east in Iceland. It's a small town, only about 3,000 inhabitants, and there's a really large dam close to there called Kárahnjúkavirkjun that kind of set the atmosphere for my life when it was built, and it was very emotional for me to see the land being destroyed and feeling how society got split into employment versus nature conservation, and like it was, a picture of black and white when it's not. And yes, here I am, and I have a background in geology, and I will do a master's program in Cambridge next year in conservation leadership. So this is very close to heart to me. So me and Peter wrote this handbook together last year, and Peter, maybe you can send a link to that. So we went over the history behind this yesterday, so I will not do that again, but you can read it in the book. So this is the bus map of our presentation. We started here yesterday and went to here, the role of youth. And today we will go more over the methods and do this route to the beautiful bus stop here. So we talked a little bit about what advocacy is, that we need to speak for nature, and we talked about a project that we can you please be on mute if you are attending, please? Thank you. Well, it was a hydropower plant that we did not want to see happen. We talked about the governance network. Everybody influences the relationship between society and nature. That it's nice to map out who are key stakeholders in the context of each project. Then we showed these conspiracy maps that we made about Hvalárvirkjun. So this is the public sector, this is the private sector, and this is the third sector of society. We talked about the laws, we talked about what laws we used, we talked about democratic legitimacy. There's a spelling error. Legitimacy is it's supposed to be. We talked about what we did. We kept members informed by a Facebook group in this project. We spoke about how Iceland is a little bit different from a lot of places, and kind of our landscape in the international arena. It's very limited, our capacities, and our society is probably different from, like, every society is different from each other. So it's good to have in mind. Youth is important. I wrote an article in an international magazine about how youth was not part of this decision making, that only stakeholders were people who would profit from this project were kind of deciding if it should happen or not. And then we had a really nice discussion. So today I have the bus map again to see. Now we will go over here we went over who to talk to, what the rules to follow, and so on. And now we will go more over how we put that into practice. So I will start by talking about how we should prioritize, because we have limited resources. Because, well, most of us are doing stuff like this in volunteer work, and we don't have a lot of money, since youth usually doesn't have as easy access to money and staff and so on. So we need to think about what we are choosing to use our energy. So here are a few things you can have in mind. Is it global or local? And is it realistic for you to have an impact? Is it something that you can actually change? And would your impact be big or small? And is there a good window of opportunity open? Are they changing the law now? Or is it something that is somewhat closed and won't be opened until later, like when they decide to change the laws or put forward new regulations? That's kind of a window of opportunity to affect how the laws are and regulations. Sometimes the matter is very urgent. Sometimes we could stretch it over longer time. Do we have enough resources, time and money to do it well, or will we kind of just be scratching the surface? Would we be, are we facing something that would cause irreversible damage, or is it something that could be taken back? So, for example, when in the cases of hydrothermal or hydropower plants, it's irreversible change, because you sink the water and they sink the land underwater, and then you can take all the water out, but the biodiversity will be gone, and then there's also a lot of things that come with the flows of rivers, like sand, and it will fill up into the reservoir. And then we could see, do we have clear goals? What can we picture what we want to get out of it? And can we just kind of strive towards that? Or is it more vague how we can impact? Is it, and what our goals really are? Do we just want to make a fuss about something to make awareness? Or do we want to kind of sneak our way into the governance and try to turn people around? So this is all something that is good to have in mind. But to me, what is also really important is, you know, am I interested in it? Because if there's something that is very important, but my interest doesn't really lie there, and my heart is not in the cause, then I probably won't do it very well. But if my heart is in the cause and I care about it, then it's more likely that I will do it well. So that's something I would advise you also to think about when you are choosing what projects you will take on. Peter, do you want to add anything to this?
Yes, and kind of generally speaking, because Þorgerður went very well over it, but I guess regardless of what you are doing, whether it's, you know, environmental advocacy or any kind of advocacy or even any kind of work, there are so many things you can do, especially if you're going into the global context. So the prioritization, I think, is the fundamental thing to address before you do anything else, so that you have your resources, you know, pointed at something that will, in a reasonable manner, give you the results you want. Because I guess there's nothing more frustrating than putting a lot of effort into things which then you realized maybe weren't either, you know, not as important to you as you thought, or you just, it was really important, but you weren't able to, you know, achieve an impact, which can be, you know, very demoralizing. So I think this initial stage of just prioritizing, okay, you know, what do you really want to focus on, and making sure that you're not focusing on too many things, I think it can't be overemphasized. And other than, you know, these general principles which we can present, it's so open-ended that you can't, you know, give any prescription about, okay, what should you do? But I think this is also a very fun and interesting process to kind of look inwards of what really, you know, what do you really want to work on, and making sure that you are in fact checking on all the options that you have available, because sometimes there might be opportunities for you to focus on that you might not have considered yet. Anyway, so prioritization, of course, as the concept implies, is super important. And once we have, you know, decided what we want to work on, then everything will much more easily fall into place.
Yes. So this is a lot of text, so this is kind of going over why we decided on the Hvalárvirkjun case to choose that particular project to work on. So in Iceland we have very clean energy, but even though the electricity is green energy, we mostly use it for industry. So we have a lot of industry, and I think about 80% of the electricity we produce just goes straight to some kind of industry or Bitcoin mining or something like that. So we have a lot of power per capita, and when you make hydro power, you have to sink land in water to keep the water in the elevation so that it can fall through the power plant. So And because Iceland is an island as well, we can't really help out some other people with worse energy, like coal power plants. So we're just stuck here in this island, and how are we using our electricity? Yeah, so there's not really any plan for that, but that's a completely different story. So we decided that there was no need for another dam to sink more land, to make more electricity, and that we already had enough. Excuse me. And also because the damage would be irreversible, we decided that was our priority. So yes, and for me, it's I think this case of Kárahnjúkar from my childhood, where I now work as a ranger in the highlands in the east. I experienced that. I look at this reservoir and I think, you know, under there is land that I never got to know, and now it's been taken away from me, the opportunity to know this land. And I have so many times I have just went on a hike in a good mood, and then I came back crying because I just got so overwhelmed because it's so big. Yes, Peter, do you want to?
Yes, and I think it's very good to put things into context, like Þorgerður is saying, because I guess it's important to mention that the topic of hydroelectric power plants is one of the most controversial topics in Iceland. And if we look at, you know, the 21st century, the project and the dam that is actually there right now, which Þorgerður has been mentioning, I think it's safe to say that it's the most controversial thing to happen regarding conservation in Iceland. And I think that relates to how unique the nature in Iceland is. You know, I guess you probably heard that there's an ongoing volcanic eruption right now, and it's a very new land because there's a lot of volcanoes. And then because, you know, just only 10,000 years ago, it was covered in a glacier, all of the, you know, plants and vegetation and animals are quite recent to come here. So there are many things that are very unique about Iceland. And well, I guess, and that's a very good question in the chat now, and I think I'll just answer it. So it says, do you think that it's possible to have a country with 100% clean electric energy? And how can we do this transition from hydroelectric power to others? So if we take Icelandic as an example, it isn't even necessarily about not having hydroelectric power plants. But as Þorgerður mentioned, we have so much electricity in the country already. So literally, I think there are around 6 companies or you know, buildings which take 80% of the electricity of the entire country. So it's more about defining first how much electricity do we need, and then try to, you know, do the best we can to use environmentally friendly options. But what has been happening in Iceland, and it happens with many things in Iceland, is that instead of thinking first about how much do we need and then filling that need, people ask themselves, how much can we do? So there are people who would literally want to, you know, dam every single river in Iceland, because when they see a river, they see money flowing into the ocean and getting lost. And this is an actual, you know, thing that people say. So I guess the main thing we're dealing with is not necessarily, you know, that one type of electricity production is bad or good, or even though of course they are, you know, have variously, you know, some are better than others, but primarily focusing on how much is enough, and that way we wouldn't have to constantly, you know, damage new nature areas. Because at some point we don't need any more. So I think that's the really important thing. And I guess, for the whole planet. If we define how much we need, we can, yes, and
Yeah, I would also like to point out, I'm not super against hydroelectric power plants. I think they're great because they make, like you said from Brazil, that you look at it as clean energy, and it is clean energy, and we need energy. But like Peter said, how much energy do we need? And when we use most of it to make aluminum, that also releases a lot of CO2, the aluminum factories, then we're kind of taking this clean product and then we use it for something bad. That's not really.
Yes. And when we asked this particular company who wanted to make this power plant what the electricity should be before, their reply was, we don't know, but probably someone will want to buy it. So there's no real need for it. So of course, no power plant is always more environmentally friendly than one. Mark, maybe you want to speak with a question.
I actually like the discussion about the renewable energy or green energy. This is actually important to define what clean energy means, because first of all, there is a difference of perspective. For example, who was it? Aline actually mentioned that in Brazil they call hydroelectric power a clean energy. While here, for example, here in the Philippines, we view hydroelectric power plants as something that is a disadvantage in nature because it decreases biodiversity, and it actually it is important that we define what clean energy is and how can we get it, because first of all, coal is not clean energy because it has it contributes to the global carbon dioxide emissions. Nuclear energy isn't one. Hydroelectric for us isn't one. And it's very interesting on how perspective can be different in other countries.
Definitely.
Yes, precisely. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just the environment is different. And like you said, in Brazil, there's still a lot of people who don't have access to electricity. And of course, that needs to be fixed. And we always need to be asking ourselves, what can fix that? Will producing more electricity fix that? Or do we need some other infrastructure as well? Like there's a lot of, it's a very complex question. And then the human rights and equality sector comes in, and it's also a little bit hypocritical sometimes of people like from Iceland who will do less or not do enough in climate in reducing CO2 emissions. And then we have so much wealth, and then there are countries that have not as much wealth and more poverty, and they need to do more things that are maybe worse for the environment, but then we need to do even more to counteract to that, because otherwise we just have so much inequality. And of course, that's probably a topic for a whole another lecture, but let's try to keep the ball rolling. But I'm really happy to get all of these questions and points.
Yes, and so a critical aspect of how we prioritize this project was that it is not, even though some people try to imply it is not providing electricity to people who have not had it, and it is not providing jobs in a region that needs jobs. And actually, unlike many power plants, this one would be remotely controlled, so there wouldn't even be a single job for the local community. And if Þorgerður, can you go back to the first slide just really quickly?
This one.
Yes. So if we just go really quickly, if we look at the local and global aspect, the nature that this power plant would destroy is unique on a global scale because of Iceland's unique characteristics of, geological history. It is realistic for our, this organization to impact this because it has built up its, relative status within the Icelandic community. And so on. And then, it would be irreversible. So I'm not going to go into detail about all these aspects, but I guess it's good to have like a practical example of how you can go through these tick boxes to see whether a project is really worth your time and efforts at the moment. Anyway, thanks.
Yes. So, so what the first step would be? So, we are also a little bit of hypocrites because we said never be, decide your opinion before gathering information. But the information we already had in the beginning was this power plant is can be, we can be without it. Let's say that. So, but still we wanted to see if they're going to build it, like what are the reasons, and we want to know how it will be done, if we want to make sure they follow all of the rules and so on. So what we would do is to arrange meetings with stakeholders, listen to them and request the information we want, then brief our core values. Like sometimes after a meeting with somebody, like the company wanted to build it, I just came home and I was like, maybe this power plant just isn't such a bad idea, just because you've been just listening and taking in the information. And then sometimes you need to go back to your support group and remember the core values. Like, what am I working on here? What are my values that I want to bring to the table? And then be open about your opinion without being rude. So like you see here, we need to do this because sometimes we could be against something. We want to protect the environment, and then we end up being against something else that is also important, like gender equality. So this picture is kind of just to show we need to listen to each other to make sure that our core values are intact, and that like for me, my core values would be to protect the environment, but gender equality is also very important. So if I go to a meeting and I realize I am, doing something that is talking against equality, I need to rethink what my opinion is. So yeah, so just even though you already decided, I don't think this is such a good idea because of my core values, go to the meetings, be open about it, listen, but don't forget your values. Don't be so open that you're just like, oh, then never mind, just do whatever you want. So that is important. Do you want to add something, Peter?
Yeah, so I guess for me personally, the main way I approach this is because, like Þorgerður mentions, even with the superficial information, you can kind of easily spot out that, oh, okay, that's a project that doesn't look very good. It's fairly easy to, have a rough estimate of whether it is something that is potentially not very good, or, maybe just is very good. So for me, I feel it's very important to kind of rephrase how I approach this step in the process. So instead of thinking, okay, based on the superficial information, I have made up my final opinion, I rather think that, okay, there is reason to look further into this. So then I'm, with a much more open mind, just gathering further information before I reach a final conclusion. Just as if you were a judge in a court case, you wait until you get to see all the facts and presentations before making the judgment, rather than, okay, now we're done 5 minutes of a presentation by one side and we have a few hours left, but I just felt those 5 minutes were so inspiring, I'm just gonna do the sentence. That is not very, not very conducive to building trust. And another benefit of this approach is that when you're meeting, a stakeholder that might, probably have a very different opinion than yourself. For example, when me and Þorgerður just met with a company that was responsible for this project, it was much easier for us to say, okay, we would like to learn about this project and what you're doing. And then after that discussion, it's easier to say, okay, and what about that and that regarding this project, instead of just showing up at their door and saying, hey, this sucks and you suck and this is all terrible, because that's probably not gonna be very conducive to an, constructive dialogue. Something in the chat.
Yes. We might just, it's not really a question, we will maybe just go over this in the discussion in the end.
Yes, let's do that.
So let's just go to the next slide. So yes, here we are meeting with the power line company, Landsnet. And then we also had meetings with the company that wanted to build this, and then we sent an email to Ankala partners telling them that it wasn't a high risk.
So that's the company. Well, the funny thing is, first there was some Canadian company funding all of this and was in ownership of the HS Orka company, the red logo at the top. But then that got sold over to Ankala partners. And then initially we tried to reach them and just ask, hey, who is responsible for this project? We would like to know more, what's going on. And then when we finally, after sending them a message on Twitter, I think we managed to get through to someone after several tries through their web form. And they said, hey, talk to the person in Iceland with the Vesturverk company. You can see the blue logo in the center. But we had already spoken with that person. So then we could, like Þorgerður mentioned, tell them, well, by the way, did you know about this, and this, which has been very controversial about the process? And by taking the time into trying to reach them before telling them, our conclusion, we were able to have an actual dialogue. And the interesting thing is that we haven't yet heard back from them. And this does take a lot more work and patience to talk with everyone first before you, make a press announcement saying, oh, this project sucks. But it's, I think, so worth it if you can and have the time and resources, which maybe you don't, by the way. So it's important to be conscious of that. But if you can meet all the stakeholders, you're in a much stronger position. And then also, the rhetoric behind why they're doing this and can try to understand where they are coming from. And then you can see and judge, for real, if it actually makes some sense, or you can point out precisely, as we say in Iceland, where I don't know why we have this saying, but like where the knife is in the cow, maybe it's an international one also. But anyway, where the actual problem is, because it might be the case that 99% of what the company does is excellent, but there might be this one bad apple project-wise. So it's better to go against that rather than the whole company.
Yeah, and also just be careful with the people that you meet. We really kind of, because when you are talking about nature conservation, sometimes you end up like you are telling the people that are running a company and want to, of course, make as much money as the company can, and then we kind of ended up, I think, making them feel like we were looking at them as bad people, and we got some reactions. Like one person kind of got angry and stormed out of a meeting because they felt that we were kind of attacking them. So that was also like a really strong learning moment for me, like, okay, I need to be super careful what I say, because I don't want to hurt people's feelings, even though I am kind of telling them I don't agree that what they're doing. But then it's healthy for people though to look inwards, but I not necessarily think I'm ready to feel responsible for that kind of burst of outrage.
Yeah, and it's good to always remember that people are, even if they seem, very stone cold towards the environment, there are a lot of emotions going on. So it's good to always remember that we are dealing with human beings with feelings. And Þorgerður, should we maybe quickly read the poem at this point or later in the presentation?
Didn't know we were planning on reading a poem, but maybe just in the end. Okay. So we used, this goes over it says ombudsman here, but how does the public communicate with the government? What we would do, or like what is done in Iceland, is that we can write public comments on law proposals or regulations or anything pretty much. Then if we don't feel happy with the government, we could, what would you say, put forward administrative appeals or run administrative appeals.
Yeah, so, well, because all of these projects are somehow dependent on the legal frame and, planning policies. So there are opportunities, when a permit is given, it is based on something where we can maybe challenge that decision, for example, with administrative appeal.
Yeah, and we could put forward a lawsuit for judicial reviews, and then we can complain to the ombudsman of Alþingi. So I like this picture. It's like the politician is a rock star, but there's, and then of course sometimes just sending an email, and like we did with somebody in the Westfjords, we sent an email congratulating them on a really good opinion they had about something, just to also to kind of try to influence the municipal level.
Yeah, and that was a very interesting case, because there was a project happening and the municipality actually gave, wanted to give a permit for something that we felt wasn't the best thing to do. But one person in the municipality board was against it. So we actually just sent a letter to that person, thanking them for, their constructive blah, 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 blah. And then we also sent it to the entire board of the municipality to kind of indirectly focus on the positive aspects, although of course, it definitely indirectly addressed, what we thought about the other stuff. And one thing that is, I guess it's important to think about regarding what's on this slide is that at the top you have the public comments, which are relatively not time consuming to do, but then if you do an administrative appeal, that does take more time, and of course, going before a court, even more time. And then to complain to an ombudsman, if you have one in your country, that's kind of you can only do that after all the other process is done. So this is kind of how things can escalate. And I think it's very important to start with the lowest step, if not only just to conserve your resources, because it's best to try to do the most elegant solution, and maybe a public comment works and they think, okay, let's not do this. But then, but then if they don't, then, we can take it up a notch step by step. But it does conserve a lot of energy to do it in a step-by-step fashion, as opposed to, going, full force from the beginning, because it might not be necessary, or it also can, damage your case instead of, showing that you were always trying to give them a chance, and it kind of looks better from the perspective of other people. Oh, that's really great. That's great to hear. I love how when this is happening. Yeah, so it's very important to know about these kinds of tools to address what is happening, and have the capacity to use them. So I'm very happy to. Yeah, I hope it's. You can let us know how it goes.
Yes, thank you. So yes, here's some examples of what we did in the case of Hvalárvirkjun. So we wrote public comments on the changes under the municipal planning strategies, because the project needs to be in there before it gets permission to start. Then we just requested a lot of information from the municipality and also from the power line company. And yes, we participated in administrative appeal to challenge the construction permit, because they got a construction permit to do research, but the research included building a lot of roads to every single dam that they wanted to build. And they said it was needed for transportation of research apparatus. But I think it can be, I can tell that they did not need to build these roads. It's possible to do in other ways, but it's more expensive, and also it's more expensive in the long run if you don't if you go ahead with the whole project. But of course, it's cheaper if you just do the research and then decide not to do it. So there's a lot of points there that didn't really make sense.
Yeah, and despite that, they tried to tell the public that it was necessarily to do this, and this was just research. So it made a really big difference that we went to a meeting with them to talk about this and ask, what are the options? And then eventually at the end of the meeting, they were like, well, we're running a business, we have to save money. So they kind of indirectly at the end of the day admitted that they were just cutting costs and not having this, exemplary method. But yeah, really digging into that helps.
Mm-hmm. So then you can participate in the public discourse, which is telling a story to the public that you can do by writing articles. You can host events, educational events, and then you can do protests. So in the case of Hvalárvirkjun, we mostly just, I think we wrote one article and then we posted on social media somewhat. And of course, we kept our members informed through the whole way, which is probably not a very public discourse, but just to keep the transparency. But we have done, every single thing of this mostly in terms of climate change. Then we have done everything. And of course, the Fridays for Future movement will use mostly the protest, and then we've been writing articles about it and hosting events about it, and telling the story of us. Why do we need to do more, and what is at stake, and etc., etc. And I think it's really important to tell a story and not just like state hard cold facts, because we want the public to kind of be with you. It needs to be from your heart to tell a story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important to, understand how it feels to be not involved with this project or even field at all. And imagine how people, like if you see an article about something that you have no background in, it can be very hard to read an article that is, you know, super technical and just a random facts and no story that you can kind of connect with. So if you can put yourselves in those shoes, then it's easier to, like Þorgerður says, tell a story, but not just, you know, list a number of facts.
Yes. So yes, here's what we did. We could send these links into the chat. But so we did a newspaper article, and then we just did some posts on social media about this. But mostly, I think our advocacy was in speaking with the stakeholders, and then in the administrative appeal, and then yes, kind of just talking to people around us rather than going very public with it.
Oh, and I think this picture, if you go back to it, is another example of how we used, I guess, rudimentary storytelling techniques, because as you can see, the red circles in the image are where the actual reservoirs would be. And then you can see that there are those rivers across the landscape, across the whole area. One of those rivers is called Hvalá. So the dam project is called Hvalárvirkjun, or Hvalá power plant. So we were with that image showing that even the name of the project is misleading, because there are actually, you know, 2 or 3 other rivers which will be damaged as well. So the name itself is actually good marketing on their behalf to try to downplay the impact of it. Because if they would have called it the power plant of Hvalá, Rjúkandi, Eyvindafjarðará, then it would be easier for people to understand the full scope of the project, which of course we would hope that they would want to do. But definitely they always continually try to downplay the impact. So by telling this kind of a story visually and saying, hey, you know, here on this picture, you can see that it is not just this one river, then that's something that at least hopefully is very easy for people to understand and make the company realize that maybe they shouldn't be pushing this rhetoric.
Mm-hmm. And then there is the global cooperation that is important. Like we can definitely feel in the Fridays for Future movement, and we felt in this project with when we wrote in the circle and spoke to some people at the World Wildlife Fund, that we could connect all these stories together in this paper. I could read about other projects people were doing in other countries and kind of learn from each other, and we can definitely help each other out, and we are so much stronger. For like where I went to the mock COP, for example, and then I met with the Prime Minister, and I could tell her, yes, so here's this treaty that was written together of youth from 140 countries. So it has so much more impact, to so much more momentum, to have people from a broad background, diverse background, together in the same cause. So that's something you can seek out. Is there somebody else doing something similar? Can I connect my project with something else where that we could help each other out and kind of give the project more momentum? That's something that can be used. Yes, do you want to add to this, Peter?
Well, I guess that shows, you know, how that kind of partnership forming, which is very useful for the advocacy part, is so interlinked with what we were talking about yesterday about how, you know, building your organization and its image. So it really shows, even though we are, you know, in the handbook and here kind of splitting it in these subparts to elaborate on each aspect, you can never really separate them, because what you do affects your image and your image and your capacities affect how well you can do things. So it's a constant, or not even back and forth. It's kind of just different aspects of the same thing.
Mm-hmm. So now it's open for discussion. I just want to add in the closing remarks, like we had the closing remarks in the book that I just want to kind of tell you about, that of course, even though we've gone around a lot of technical things, you could go over the handbook and try to learn all of the stuff and then read about your governance in your country and learn everything before doing your advocacy. But I think learning advocacy is the best by doing, and you don't need to be an expert in everything to be able to have an impact. So this handbook and this lecture is more of guidelines to kind of help you, but don't be intimidated by all of these things, and to do something. And I hope that it's more inspiring than intimidating. But I think, like, we wrote this handbook after we did a lot of things, and then we thought, oh, this is information that we want to carry on, and so that people don't have to go through this, or like we don't have to invent the bike all of the time. We can just kind of build on top of that, but don't feel intimidated that you need to know everything before starting. You can just start and then learn on the way. And it's good. I've done it a lot of times right now. I've been going back to the book to just to remember things, to like, okay, what did we read about this? And just to kind of, yeah, remember things better. So yes, now I think I will just stop sharing the screen.
And maybe we can start with what we had already in the chat, but had left for later. Oh yes, and sorry about my pronunciation, but it was from Thirandi about the possibility of, well, maybe I should just read it. So that personally, I don't think it's possible for a country to have 100% clean energy or electric energy unless they are very driven towards sustainability, which unfortunately, at least from a US perspective, I don't think is the priority for many countries, although it definitely is for some. I think it's possible to get quite close, but 100% clean electric energy seems pretty utopian in terms of an idea. Like, it's a really nice idea, and I wish we could reach that point. I just don't see it happening anytime soon, at least not where I live. And now switching back to myself, I think that's a very kind of honest description of how things are, because you know, we have a vision of how we would like things to be, but we are definitely, you know, waking up from a bad dream, and we are much more closer to, well, like all of you know, things aren't going that great for the environment and us. So I think it's very important to have this kind of realistic approach, and also, of course, a positive attitude, and not get kind of dragged into being unrealistically optimistic and then failing and getting demoralized, or of course having doom and gloom and not wanting to do anything. Does anyone want to chime in on this?
Well, I think it's really interesting. I went to a field trip in the it's called the Carb Fix project, and so there's this company that is taking highly concentrated CO2 or sulfur dioxide and just kind of spraying water on it, so it dissolves in the water, and then pumping it down into the basaltic ground, and then it just becomes stone. So that's an example of something that can be done also in terms of industry that is polluting a lot in these gases. But it's not. There's also this project that they are kind of just like gathering CO2 from the air and then pumping it down. That's like super energy consuming and not a very good idea. But in terms of making electricity out of coals, you could take all of the emissions and then put them down to the ground according to this method. So I think we should aim pretty high in terms of solutions, even though not building just a lot of hydro power plants or clean energy power plants is necessarily the solution. We will always try to minimize the impact that we have and try to find more solutions. Yes, we're aiming for 75% is much more realistic than 100. That's true. Where are you from? Your name is Firandi. You're from the US, okay. Nice, yeah. It's also very different between regions. How much of the electricity already is clean energy and kind of what I know, like for the US market, it's also a very like a capitalist market, and people will. I remember Canada once did this law that you needed to have an extra percentage of clean energy, and then the coal and oil electricity power plants just sued Canada and won, because they were making it harder for them to run their business. So we need to remember also what kind of an environment and society we live in. So kind of we need all of the people aboard to change things. We need society to be on board.
Yes, and one thing I found very useful is to define very precisely what you want to happen. For example, if you would look at North America, it has many units of power grids and systems. So if you would just look at it as one thing and say, okay, I want everything to be 100% renewable at some point, that isn't very practical. It's very difficult to act on that. But if you map what are the power systems, where are the power plants, and then you identify, okay, what regions have the capacity to develop into other power sources and so on. So when you have kind of a higher resolution, it's much easier to make precise practical goals, because I guess one of the main hindrance is when people have this kind of abstract thinking about what they want to achieve without really tying it to something specific. For example, in Iceland, we wanted to make sure that the process for this particular power plant was being done, in the correct manner, instead of, going to the news media and saying just in general that power plants are bad. I mean, that wouldn't have had any specific effect, but if you can really define to the smallest level of detail, so to speak, and then it's easier to have something concrete.
Also, like the world is aiming and Iceland is aiming to become carbon neutral, whatever that means, in 2040, and then they say we're going to be completely without fossil fuels in 2050. But if you don't have any steps on the way, like realistic, specific steps, it doesn't mean anything. So aiming for 100% renewable energy, if you don't know all of the sources of energy and how you can change them into, you don't have any like steps on the way, it's completely meaningless. You can't just throwing responsibility out of the window to the future generations to be like, okay, I've made this goal, but I'm not really doing anything about it other than trying to look good and banning plastic bags or whatever. And then the future generation that will be in the government in the time of the goal will have to kind of have the responsibility to say, okay, we can't reach this goal, or try to reach it in extreme plans or yes. So so I think having your goals aiming high for long term, but making the steps is very important. And also we do not have to make all of the steps because we are not politicians. Our politicians have quite high salaries and they have a lot of responsibilities, and they are elected, and we should be able to tell them this is what we want, and then they make the steps because that's their job. So don't feel demoralized if people ask you, oh, okay, how are you going to do that? Just answer, I shouldn't have to answer all of these specific questions because I'm doing this in my spare time, and I also have a job, and I'm also in school, and there's people that get paid to do this, and they should be doing the jobs, and that's not asking for a lot, asking people to do their jobs, in my opinion. So
yes, exactly. And maybe I just thought of something, and maybe it's a strange metaphor, but for example, if you want to become a doctor, you don't just go to a hospital and say, hey, I'm going to be a doctor. You find out where there are schools which provide that kind of training and certificates. So you don't go directly to where you want to get, find the correct pathway to that. And similarly with, power infrastructure, you have to know, what are the potential companies that might be part of leading that change, what, local politicians and national politicians structure the policies that influence how that might actually happen. And, where are they going to buy the actual tools or whatever. And yes, all those practical details that can maybe be less interesting than having the solution right away.
And I think I was reading some of the chat that you were talking about that in the US there's a lot of opposition in the society to be environmentally thinking. And I think what I've seen in Iceland too much is that when we have some issue and there is a lot of people against it, rather than kind of aiming towards the people in the middle to get them on board, people start to attack the people on the completely opposite side. So instead of trying to reach people who are just kind of nobody, they just don't really care about it, is rather than getting them to care about it, people start attacking climate deniers. And that just kind of makes more of a gap, yeah, like a big gap between the causes, and then the people in the middle will feel a pressure to choose sides rather than they will try to do better. So we don't need, like we've been saying, we don't need a handful of people doing things perfectly. We need a lot of people doing everything imperfectly. But by making a gap, you're just making a lot of people hop on the wagon of denying, and then the rest might be on your side, but then they will, like I've been seeing a lot of people becoming these doom and glooms because they just don't see the hope. And so I would try to kind of, when you are doing the mapping, if you want to change society, you will try to map society. There's these groups, and then try to aim towards the groups that are kind of on the verge, rather than attacking the people who are opposite to you.
And related to that, how you approach the people that maybe you feel are, more involved with the problem than others. it is so important to approach them still, in a manner that reflects well on yourself, because I've seen real examples happening here in Iceland where, maybe there are some people who want to do some development that is controversial, and then the facts come to the surface, and it, is actually not such a great project. For example, there's this power line, and Þorgerður has actually been kind of involved with talking about this project in the media. So basically, they want to make a new power line, and they want to use the traditional power lines on those pillars, whatever. But there is an option of just putting it in the earth next to a road. It's a little bit more expensive, but technically feasible, and yada yada. But because the people who have been speaking, well, some of the people who have been speaking against the project and saying you need to put it in the ground, because they have been behaving in a not so elegant manner, because they're so focused about being right and they don't need to be, have any social norms about how they act. That means that the other people are so frustrated on how the others are acting that even if they kind of agree with them, they just don't want to lose to those people, and they get, even more defensive. So also, making sure not to trigger people in that way can make things a lot easier, because it's bad enough that you're against their project, but it's even worse if they are kind of personally against you rather than just on the professional level. And
so we said you have a raised hand, Thirandi.
Hi. So I've been making some comments in the chat about how there's this, at least in the US here, that's something that we really face is we have, as you probably have heard, like in the news, we have this very strong sense of nationalism, which has its benefits, but also I think kind of has its has bad points to it as well. So something that we really struggle with here, especially recently, is distinguishing between politics and between issues such as the environment. So a lot of people here, like society in general, it's very difficult to talk about issues like the environment because so many people will think about it politically. So for example, here in the US, we have Democrats and Republicans, so conservatives, and then the other aspect of it. So for example, if I give a suggestion nowadays, just the way that our society is if I give a suggestion to someone who's shopping in a grocery store and I tell them, hey, why don't you try to be more environmentally conscious and go from using plastic bags to using reusable bags. Now, that's a suggestion that I would give somebody being an environmentally conscious person. It's not, I know that it's not driven by politics. It's just something that I'm trying to help with in order to help that person contribute towards a healthier environment. So if I told them that, that person could take it two ways. They could take it as, oh, like, thank you for the suggestion, you know, I might actually start doing that. Or they could also take it as, oh, she's just telling me this because she's a leftist and she's trying to put her political views into my head. I'm not going to listen to her because, you know, like, I don't want to conform to leftist views. So it's just, it's very complicated nowadays. And I feel like, at least in the US, the role of environmentalists are just going to get harder because something that we're struggling with now is helping people distinguish between the two types of issues. So I believe there are things that should be political. You know, I feel like there is a part in the environmental movement that is important to be taken to the political standpoint. So for example, if we need funding for things, that would be very useful to take to state and local governments. But in terms of just the way people think about it, personally, I just have always just kind of like felt frustration towards those that just don't understand that, sure, they do have like interconnected parts, but in the end, the environment is a completely different issue. And I feel like there needs to be a distinction between that. And that's something that I've just seen, like, at least in my community, like my most immediate community, whenever I have conversations like these, it's just that a lot of people have trouble with understanding that there is a distinction between them. And I feel like political views now drive a lot of people's kind of like standpoints on issues such as the environment. So it's just something that I see and that I'm anticipating will just be a struggle going forward. So that is something that we also just need to understand, along with things such as, you know, like understanding the importance of details and understanding the importance of not aiming too high in terms of a global standpoint. So there are just, I feel like there are just a lot of things now that are just popping up that as a society, we're just going to all have to work on globally. So
yeah, I thank you for this. And I think this was kind of the case in Iceland just a few years ago, but I really think that the Fridays for Future movement that is very international has really helped. Now I think all of the political parties are, like, none of them deny that climate change is a problem. So that wasn't really the case, and people kind of didn't even bother to talk about climate change before the elections. Like maybe just 10 years ago, nobody talked about it except this one political party, and now everybody is talking about it and think that it matters. So I hope that, of course, the United States have a very complicated culture also about this, about the nationality, and so I think I hope that it will change to the better, and I definitely think it will in time, but then we can try to work on that in an international cooperation. But Mark Chester, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm just gonna add to the points that was made a while ago. Yeah, I think that as a not an American but a avid fan of American politics, I think it has been increasingly worrying that people are not able to distinguish what politics are or what issues are that, for example, environmental issues, they are not able to to distinguish that. And yeah, I think that in order to solve that, we have to like make them realize the importance of the environment, that the environment is an asset to all, that the environment gives benefits to all, and that all depends on environment. All things depend on environment. Our economy depends on the state of our environment. Our daily state of living depends on our environment. So I think that's one, because environment transcends all, even Republicans, even Democrats. Because yeah, I think that in America people are associating environmentalism into kind of a more democratic idea rather than a conservative idea, because mainly because environmentalism actually, for example, we as environmentalists actually hate the idea of coal, of burning coal, because it adds to the carbon dioxide emissions. It is a main contributor of carbon dioxide emissions. And so but conservative, being a conservative, being a Republican, they are more on they are more on a business sided, they are more on the side of business, or they like to bloom their business. So they support the idea of coal being used as a means of producing energy. So yeah, I think that if we could make a way that we can make them realize that, oh, we benefit from from the environment. This food came from the environment. This like this you know there are a lot of benefits in the environment that could provide us, and so that we have to like care for the environment. And yeah, I think that that is a good way to solve that problem. And also I was seeing the chat box, and yeah, in order that we have to consider feasibility on setting up our goals, because we cannot just for example, tomorrow we have to like cut carbon emissions. We have to take note of the feasibility and the process and the or we have to take note in what period could this project be possible, or what are steps that we have to take on before we reach that goal. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I want to share with you a picture that we use in some other presentations about what is at stake with nature. So, like you can see in this circle, it's not just food, materials, medicinal resources, and fresh water. There's like lots of things: water regulation, erosion regulation, pollination, and then also just spiritual and mental and physical health, and just lots of things that we rely on heavily in nature, other than just, I think when we think about sustainability, we tend to only think about food and materials, raw materials, and maybe, you know, fresh water and medicine, but we kind of forget to think about all of the other stuff. So I really like this picture that we got from this World Wildlife Fund Living Planet report. Yes, I wanted to share it with you.
Yes, and related to that discussion about, you know, when you approach someone and say something or comment on something, and they, like was mentioned, you know, they might react in very different ways. This is actually something that I'm quite interested in, to like understanding, and at least one thing I've thought about in this context is, you know, well, I guess a story could be, you know, most useful to tell that. That, for example, in Iceland, like Þorgerður mentioned, like 10 years ago, the climate, you know, was not really on the agenda, and we even had an prime minister saying there was opportunity in climate change, and things were just, you know, they were there. And to me, I think one of the main things that changed, because we borrow a lot from, you know, American politics, discourse-wise. I mean, we digest so much, you know, movies and TV shows, and also just, you know, political affiliations, especially anyway. So what I think had a pretty big impact was that when there were people in the private sector and people with, you know, backgrounds in business and energy companies, they really realized and understood what the real problem going on. And people with that background started to openly say, hey, we have to deal with this climate change, and hey, we have to, you know, use less oil. When someone with that kind of background came and said that, of course, you know, there were people with, you could say, traditional right-winged background who, you know, would disparage anything said like that. But when this message had been coming for long enough from that direction, they kind of lost their footing to put that into those this, you know, contrast between left and right, and just saying it's just leftist crap, blah 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 blah. So when it was coming from a different direction, it didn't have the same polarization, and I think that probably played a pretty big impact, because it's not just that, you know, a new kind of stakeholder was engaging in a dialogue, but it was a stakeholder which they still had kind of on a different level, very similar political ideologies, and people just started to say, you know, for business, we have to deal with climate change. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, it makes such a different, like, who says things and in what context. and how these, ideologies evolve over time within individuals and groups, if that makes any sense.
Personally, I'm not a big fan of all of these anthropocentric viewpoints that we need to save the climate for business, but it works on a special group of people, of course.
Yeah, and definitely, and it kind of helped diffuse them from aggressively attacking anyone talking about climate change. But like you say, we definitely need to move away from also the dualism of man versus nature, as opposed to us being a part of it.
But yeah, I think the thing about climate deniers is that I think it's been a really difficult kind of case, because before COVID became the #1 news report every time, there was this talk about climate change on the news in the national television of Iceland. And then they invited one climate denier to the panel, and people got very angry and said like she shouldn't be able to share her opinions. And I think that's kind of fuel to the fire to the deniers if we just tell them they're not allowed to speak. So allowing people to just kind of speak, but also arguing, counter-arguing with them somewhat. I'm not necessarily saying I would invite the climate denier to a panel like this, because I think it's just a very small group that I don't think needs to be represented in this way, but telling them that they are not allowed to speak will just make more division. Then people will say who decides who can speak and who cannot speak, and then you kind of you make a more of a gap. And
exactly
between the groups.
And if we look at at least like with Iceland being situated between North America and Russia as an example, historically there are many people maybe in Western cultures and politics very much afraid of what was the Soviet Union and so on. So one thing they feel very strongly about can be that, okay, I want to have, the freedom to speak publicly and have, some democracy things, and that kind of fear. So for example, if I would come into the contest and say, hey, I think we can save the environment, you just make me a dictator and I will fix everything, then people who might generally want to save the environment would feel so strongly against the methodology of how society operates and the democracy and everything. Of course, I'm taking a bit of an extreme example, but kind of and I guess the tricky part is to make all those things that matter, like all the different sustainable development goals, if we can find a solution that in a reasonable manner combines all those goals instead of just picking your favorites, then it's much easier to reach a broader group and having them understand that you're not there to make one SDG your priority so all the others can get lost, but like really making sure that all of them are implemented.
I think also that you were talking about in the chat about the doomists and the fatalists, that well, my way of dealing with those people is just, if you want to give up, that's up to you. I'm gonna keep my hope, and if I don't have hope, then I have nothing. So I need to just kind of let them be and not try to argue with them. I will just try to, like, I've been doing a lot of high school presentation, and then one of the things that we say, one thing that can have to lower your emission is have one less child. And then I usually tell them, do not think of children as CO2 emitters, because they give your life meaning. Like, if you want kids, have kids, otherwise you're giving up. And I would just argue in the same way to mists. Like, if you want to give up and just decide that you can't do anything, that's up to you. Please don't try to tell me that everything I'm doing is for nothing. That's just rude and horrible and demoralizing for me, and I don't need that in my life. Please.
And related to that, I think this shows how, you know, climate issues are related to mental health and sense of community and things like that. And just how people, you know, deal with problems to begin with, because many times it can be that people genuinely feel that, okay, I don't want, you know, because if we look, I mean, how does denial usually happen? It often happens when people feel that the problem is bad, but they feel so helpless that they go into denial. I mean, that's usually what's happening. So, I mean, there's always a small percentage that, you know, isn't very well equipped to deal with these kind of things. So if we can think about how we can help people wrestle, you know, mentally with the prospect of some, you know, very difficult challenge in a proactive manner and, you know, constructive manner, rather than marginalizing them even further, I think that also builds on, you know, the importance of having a sense of community at the local and global level. Without, you know, I guess we could do a whole, you know, year to talk about that as well.
But yeah, I definitely need to constantly remind myself that if I think too much about really realistic approaches about what impact I can have, and if the world, like how climate change will end, I just will go mad, because nobody can know the future, and I am doing everything I can, and there's nothing more I can do. So you kind of just need to keep on going, and if people want to tell you it's all for nothing, then that's, yeah, in my opinion, is rude, and I don't need that kind of people in my life.
Oh, and maybe now, since we have half an hour left and we've gone into a bit of the heavier stuff, maybe now's the time for the poem. So I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen, and let me see. So this is part of the handbook, and I just want to share this because this is actually an original translation we did specifically for the handbook. We couldn't find any English version translation of this Icelandic poem, which was made by a very famous poet and politician in Iceland some time ago. You can see it on the screen, at least, you know, born in 1864.
What is funny about this poet is that in the time he was writing this poem and was young, aiming high for wealth and for people was to build a lot of dams, because the concept of conservation kind of didn't exist. So he was like a big guy who wanted to build a lot of power plants. But
exactly.
The times have changed, and people sometimes feel like, oh, did you put a poem by that poet into the book? Like, yes.
Yeah, and that's a kind of a controversy, or like logical dilemma that I really like for this context, because this poem is more about, you know, the emotional life of people, and is, you know, one sentence in it is, I guess everyone knows that sentence, even if they don't know it from this poem, and I guess it kind of shows in a way, you know, you can be focused on one topic and be very well equipped to deal with that. But if you can't listen to people working on other topics and, you know, work together, then you will have clashes. And I guess you can already read it on the screen, so maybe I don't need to read it out loud.
You can read it aloud anyway.
Okay, so a smile can transform darkness into daylight. As a drop changes the whole surface of a bowl, spirits can break at a single sneer. Kindness shall guide in the presence of a soul. So often the heartstrings are torn apart by bitter and wholly unjustified scorn. How many lament a spiteful glance which will never be taken back? And
this kindness shall guide in the presence of a soul is is the famous line. Like, you need to be careful around everybody, even though they seem tough on the surface, even though you completely disagree with them when you think they're being evil. Try to attack their cause and not them personally.
Yeah, exactly. And
yeah, not just try, just don't attack them personally.
Exactly. And of course, it sounds, it rhymes slightly better in the original Icelandic version, but I have to say, just put it out there, I'm really proud of this translation that I did with the help of my friend. But that's beside the point. But it's so important to think about those, emotional aspects of dealing with this kind of work, both internally of having the, not getting lost in the gloom, but also, we are dealing with other people who are probably themselves, dealing with some types of or aspects of gloom. And it's really about, getting everyone, well, if not everyone on board, at least, having as few people against some very good solutions.
Does anybody want to share some thoughts or stories about their projects and how they've been approaching people, society, stakeholders? Yes, Thirandi, can you please pronounce your name? I want to hear how it's said.
Thirandi. So you are actually pronouncing it right.
Okay.
So in the US, I'm part of an organization called the Citizens Climate Lobby. And what we basically do is we work together as just ordinary concerned citizens like you and like me. Like none of us work at like the IUCN. We don't work at like all these big organizations. We're just ordinary people who are just concerned about climate change. And what we do is we work as individual communities to help enact different climate policies in our governments. So one really interesting thing that happened to us recently was we were trying to get this one bill passed. It's actually the bill that our organization stands for. It's a carbon fee is what we stand for, and it's what we hope to get passed in our government. So recently, a few months ago, the carbon fee was, I believe it was going to be enacted, but then they actually never reintroduced it into our government system. But then about 2 weeks ago, we had this really interesting lobby session, and we were lobbying with different representatives in our original counties and in our states and in our local governments. And we were just making sure, we had this big meeting and we were all making sure to speak on further educating all of these little governmental groups about why it's so important that a carbon fee is enacted. And I believe on the week of April 1st, we received the news that they did actually reintroduce it into the House. So that was just such a big thing for us because, like I was explaining, we're just this group of ordinary citizens, we don't have, we do have a lot of support, but, we're not as recognized as like the World Bank. We're not as recognized as the IUCN. We're not as recognized as all these big organizations, but our small little contribution helped in this kind of national debate and this national act, and it ended up getting reintroduced, and that was just, it was a very big step forward for us because that's what our organization stands for. So I don't know, ever since then, I've always just had this kind of standpoint of like, you don't have to have this big position in society to help make a difference. All you need to do is just, honestly, on an individual standpoint, you just need to be one person that cares about the issue. And if you find other people that care about the issue equally and stand together with those people, you can make really big national level changes. So I'm one of those people that really believes in the individual voice. And this new bill that got proposed, it kind of just helped heighten that perspective for me. So that's just something really interesting that happened in the US recently.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very good example of what you can do. And actually, even though, like you talked about that the environment in the United States is somewhat difficult to be an environmentalist, and also like we are in Iceland in the association right now, we're doing a project very similar to the Sunrise Movement, which I think was really good and really effective. So we really look up to you as well in a lot of ways. Yeah, the organization is called the Icelandic Youth Environmentalist Association. I can send you the website.
Aren't you meaning Tirantes organization?
Oh.
And just on that story, it's so great to hear a story like that shows how persistence pays off. And we actually, this reminds me of a saying we have in Icelandic, which basically often a small tuft topples a heavy load. Referring to if you have a wagon with a heavy load, and those tufts, which apparently are quite common in Iceland. I don't know about your local vegetation, but it's so important to be able to, even though you are, just few individuals or this, small group, to be able to really leverage your position to have a positive impact. So it's really great to hear about examples like that. And like the other phrase that the drop hollows the stone, I also really like that one. Just the persistence really can pay off.
What is a CCL?
So it stands for Citizens Climate Lobby. It's actually an international organization. So there are different branches of it from country to country. And yesterday, actually, we had a meeting for CCL International, and we had some members join from Australia, and they were letting us know about their carbon fee situation there. So yeah, I believe it's like 130 different countries and different places around the world have organizations, but I believe it's also very easy to just start an organization because it's like nonprofit, it's bipartisan, and it does have a bit of prevalence around the world. So I believe if you find like a group of people that do care about it, it should be fairly easy to start a little organization in your own little country. So as I was saying in the chat, I'm hosting an introductory meeting to it tomorrow from 6 to 8 p.m. US and Canada time. So if anybody wants it, I can put the link. It's through a platform known as WebEx. And the only reason I did that was because Zoom has time restrictions unless you pay for it. So if you want, I can put that link into the chat, and I'm trying to recruit more people to join because as I was saying, like ever since that bill got passed, my brain has always just kind of like, I've just been very more happy ever since then. I've just kind of realized the power of like an individual voice and the power of the voices of ordinary citizens, because that is just what we are, ordinary people who just want to see the changes, and we've just banded together to make those changes. Because the voice, I think like ever since that act, something that I realized was the voice of citizens, the voice of all these different groups of people in communities, we may not know it. We may just have this idea of like, oh, like I'm just one person, what difference can I make? But these groups of one people, these groups made up of just one person, just helped get a act reintroduced into the national government. So it just goes to show the power behind one voice. And yeah, if anybody's interested, I would definitely love to put the link, and I would love if more people could join.
I would love to see the link, but I'm not really sure what time it is in Iceland. 6 in.
So it's from 6 to 8 p.m. If you want, I can try to convert it to Icelandic time.
Oh,
I can
Well, if you have just, you know, the put in the time zone or like which coast or state you're in, we should probably be able to
sure, let me do
find
that.
it.
Then.
And oh, this reminds me and relates to what we discussed a little bit yesterday, and I guess it's good to get back to, since we have now 15 minutes left, is that it's so useful to be able to have these kind of conversations about, you know, what we are doing, how are we doing it. And one thing that came up yesterday, you know, okay, wouldn't it be great to have a platform to be able to have these discussions, you know, in general, because there are ongoing projects, and, you know, does this platform already exist? I don't know. So basically, me and Þorgerður are gonna, you know, check with the IUCN and ask, you know, is there anything similar existing? And if any of you weren't yesterday, I can't remember all the names. But if you want us to, you know, let you know if something comes up of that sort, you can put your emails in the chat and we'll look into it, because I think it would be really great to find or create a platform like that and kind of start building this international, you could say, depository of, you know, we have this resource that is this handbook. I'm guessing some other people have made similar content and also having this space to discuss. So at least I'm really interested in figuring out some way to achieve that. Oh, and thanks for putting in the link in the chat. That's great.
thank you. So yes, this has been really great. I see like a lot of you were here yesterday as well, and that makes me very happy that you came again. And yeah, I'm super thrilled to. You can, well, we probably still have your info, contact info, but maybe you can share it if you want some of the others to have it.
Yes,
but we still have it.
And in case any of you didn't do it yesterday, then you can share it now. Otherwise, we have it. And also let us know. Wait. Anyway, we'll look it up and try to figure something out and let you know. Oh, and related to that, I'll have to use my position here to share about something kind of related. Because I was also involved with another session on Monday and Tuesday at the Global Youth Summit. And that refers to the high seas in areas beyond national jurisdiction, which I don't know if you've been involved with or not, but basically the short story is that usually there are constituencies to UN processes like, you know, the climate negotiations, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and now the UN is making a new agreement for the high seas, which is, you know, the oceans and literally half the planet, which is beyond the jurisdictions of countries. And there's actually now a group forming to create, you know, a group for that. So I just wanted to share with you the link just for fun, since we're here. Kind of off topic, but still fun.
But yeah, I think we will let that be the end of this this track. Thank you all for attending, and this has all been recorded, so I hope some people will watch it later and learn. So learn all from both from us and also from all of your amazing inputs. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
þetta ekki bara geggja vel.
Já, bara frábært. Ég er hérna að vista hjá mér spjallskjalið til að halda því til haga.
Já, cool.
Og þá erum við bara góð. Ef við ekki bara skjótast út úr þessu og við getum kannski bara heyrt í ekki upptöku.
Já, frábært. Bless, bless. Bye, Mark.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.